On our episode today, I have Kristina, the Senior Director of Global Media at Hasbro. I'm really excited to have her. Kristina, I've known you for so long and I love your energy, and you are probably one of the smartest people I know. So I know this is going to be one of my favorite podcast episodes. So, Kristina, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm wearing my sparkles. I'm ready to shine and,
Uh,
have some good, smart, fun conversation. Let's do this.
so let's get started with the basics. So, how did you get to where you are today? Like, tell us a little bit more about your career path.
Gosh. Okay. So I started my career in magazines, buying print and outdoor advertising for a holding company way back in 2006 for some small brands, some maybe not small, but not necessarily big known brands. XOXO is a juniors brand, Sag Harbor, O Oscar. They're primarily sold at Macy's. I went to school for fashion and journalism. So this really was this kind of fantastic intersection that, when you're applying for all these jobs, you actually have no idea what you're going to do with your life. And I was like, this seems kind of fun. Let's
Yeah.
do it. Plus, at like 23, these were kind of like the glory days of advertising. So
Yeah.
it was, especially in print. So, I remember actually, it's really funny. I think about my first meeting that I ever had with a publisher. It was Ladies Home Journal, which is like a defunct magazine. I had this really fancy dinner, and my boss, I remember she elbowed me and was like, Kristina, it's okay for you to have a glass of wine. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, oh my God, must be professional, must not do anything, which is like clearly like, I had no idea what like was happening. But after that, which was, I think I was there for about 2 years. That's when I really made my path towards digital. Started working at one of the large agencies on 7th Avenue in New York City,
Yeah.
MEC, which is no more, merged with one of the others. I worked on the Macy's account, which really kind of taught me everything I needed to learn, because they had a ton of money to spend and literally a sale every day.
Yeah.
So really went from print into digital and kind of haven't looked back since. From there, I went to a company that was a holding company again that held brands like Rebecca Taylor and Vince, where I worked on the e-commerce side of the business, which was really interesting only because having worked on advertising, then you can kind of
Yeah.
understand the back end and how all those things worked. From there, that's where I met you, Samir. I ended
Yep.
up at Morpheus, which was truly like this tiny agency, but had by far the most luxurious brands in the business at that point, I would say. And I was there running the LVMH fashion and beauty business, which truly was like putting those feet to the fire.
Yep.
So as
That was
you
a good
know,
time. That was a good time.
which again, working in luxury, always in fashion. From there, I went to Kate Spade, where I was in-house. So obviously, again, this was really truly the like when I think about myself in a brand, it was Kate Spade New York. So I was managing their digital marketing, which was such an exciting opportunity. And this is really when Pinterest was just launching, Instagram was really picking up. I always had my nails painted this color called Cajun shrimp because I had to always have my hands ready to be in a social media post, because every day was a content opportunity, whether it being reading the newspaper or eating a cupcake. My hands were all over that Instagram feed, so that
I
was
love that. That's so funny.
amazing, super super fun. But then obviously having being in this career for so long, it was kind of time for my husband and I to start a family. So we ended up buying a house and transitioned our lives back to Rhode Island, where we're both from. So that's when I came to Hasbro. So I was at Hasbro for about a year, ended up actually consulting for both Kate Spade and Hasbro, as I was trying to have started a family, was going through some infertility treatment. So I was consulting and then went back full time about 8 years ago. So I've been in this job, I guess 8 years since then.
I love it. I love it. I love that it's like fashion and beauty. Start a family, go to a toy brand.
Well, the thing is, like, I always think about it, it's so true because it's like where I was in those like stages of my life, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like in the fashion world, doing this, carrying purses, wearing high heels, running around New York City, and then it's like move home, and now I'm like slinging, monopolies and Nerf blasters and all My Little Ponies. Like it's very funny how it has all worked out.
It's so funny, and I think we'll get to this, but I think the parallels between the fashion world and
Oh
toy
yeah,
world are really fascinating because,
yeah.
in fashion, and you know this better than anybody else, but like you can't tell somebody to buy a bag. You have to make them want the bag. And
Right,
same
right.
thing with toys, right? Like you can't tell them to buy a toy. You have to make
Yes,
them want the toy and go tell their
right.
parents to buy the
And
toy.
the mediums of how you do that are actually, very different, but also very similar. And I will say too, the life cycles of both toys and fashion are similar in the sense that there's two seasons, if you
Interesting.
think about it. So like, there's fall and spring fashion week, and then it's also
Yeah.
like Easter and then holiday. So it's very similar in the sense of how you market because it's very seasonal focused. And it's really
Oh,
hard to create that demand in those non-seasonal periods.
that's really interesting. So before we go too far into the
Yeah.
media side, so tell us a little bit about Hasbro. What is it? What are the things that are covered under it? All those kinds of things.
Yeah. So Hasbro, it is the toy company. I live in
Mhm.
Rhode Island, so I always say that only because there's a hospital in Rhode Island. Hasbro is the toy company. We are within the top three amongst Mattel, Hasbro, and Lego globally. We have some brands that I think you might obviously recognize as kids, but Nerf is a huge one for us. Monopoly, our entire gaming portfolio, in fact, is probably I don't think people realize Hasbro has so many. You can think of things like
Yeah.
Clue, Trouble, Twister, Jenga, so many classic games that are all in our closets today. Preschool brands like Play-Doh, Peppa Pig, My Little Pony, Baby Alive. So really some iconic brands, Transformers. And then of course
Yes.
from I would say the older crew, there is also Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, which is I
Yeah.
would say a newer acquisition within the past 10 years or so.
That's exciting. I know you and I were talking about that.
Yes.
For any of my listeners, I am a big Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering fan. So Wizards of Silver Coast being
You guys
purchased
are
is
a
huge.
very loyal bunch with a lot
Loyal man. Yes, that is true. So let's talk about paid media. You cover all the paid media, and then um, when you're looking at your media campaigns, when you're
Mhm.
looking about it, how are you even we talk about this like brand versus performance, and I
Yes.
think that there is this like concept of brand versus performance.
Yes.
Uh, but I don't want it, I never want it to feel like it's one or the other, but it is an investment strategy, and you need to decide like where a
Totally.
dollar is going, how are we investing in brand versus when are we investing in performance? And how do you guys think about that? Like, how do you balance the two?
Yeah. So I will say we've been under we definitely some times of transition at Hasbro. I don't oversee all of global media myself. My partner in crime, her name's Jennifer Birch, also senior director of global media. She oversees all of the upper funnel types
That's
of
awesome.
tactics. So any like brand media specifically, as I oversee all things lower funnel, so performance retail, as well as kind of media operations. So I kind of have done a variety of jobs at Hasbro. Prior to being in the global role, I oversaw everything full funnel in North America. So I do definitely understand how it needs to function. But I will say that between Jen and myself, we have really, well, number one, we really like each other. So that helps. When you and your coworker truly like can just make all of the things happen very seamlessly because you are, thinking what that person's thinking. I do
Yeah.
think we are incredibly lucky in that sense. But also, it's worked out really well because we have separate teams that function under the same leader. So we both report into the CMO at Hasbro. But she is overseeing the agencies and tactics that are responsible for brand. I am responsible for everything that's lower funnel. And then we call this, this famous term that we say internally famous, it's called splitsies, where whenever we're able to, super technical, right? Whenever we're able to counteract each other, that's truly where we're able to make that happen. And why that
Yeah.
is so important is because as you know, like everything's tied to a budget. So
Yeah.
we are responsible for the total media budget, but we can flex between the two. When we see something working down here, how do we, flex it up? And if something's up here, how do we flex it down? That's really been important because media at Hasbro, it sits, underneath the CMO org, but we have different teams. So we have the marketing team that's responsible for how things are going into the market, and then there's also
Yeah.
the sales team from my world of like what they've sold into retail. So those don't
Right.
always align, right? And you have conflicting budgets, but at the end of the day, like if we need Hasbro to win, right? So
Yeah.
Jen and I are truly one of the few teams that has full oversight of the entire portfolio, because brands are typically, there's people who work on specific brands and they only know what their brand looks like from top to bottom, but not how it goes across.
Fascinating.
So again, like we are a portfolio of brands. Lego definitely has the advantage over us because they are one brand, right? So
Yeah.
it's really it's interesting, it's super fun, but it's also incredibly challenging just because so much is tied to budgets internally. And for us, it's just like we just want the things that are succeeding to actually succeed. And it might not be what is planned, but like that's typically how things work, right? You don't know
Yeah.
until you know. And the beauty about performance retail is you can tell immediately what's working.
Yeah.
Jen is definitely at the disadvantage. Her media is expensive, right? Like it's not typically if you're going to compare ROAS, it's going to look terrible compared to
Right.
my
Yeah.
world, right? So like
Yeah.
you're going to decide budget on that. Jen's going to have no money.
Right.
So it just things like really ensuring that the brands that you want to have the best shot at succeeding, we try and set them up for success at the beginning of the planning cycle and ensure that they are planned to sufficiency.
Yeah.
That's the best thing that we can do to give any one of our brands, the best case scenario.
It's fascinating because it almost seems like the secret sauce is to have a performance marketing person that's an advocate for brand. And it's
Well, and
like,
that's it. It's it's not hard.
yeah.
It's not hard. And truly, it's just like having a performance person who's a media person. Because at
Right.
the end of the day, like I could do brand and Jen could do performance because we want Hasbro to win and we
Right.
don't care. It doesn't matter. We always talk about the brands as like picking your children because there's so many, right?
Yeah.
I don't care which child wins. I just want the best one to win. It
Yeah.
sounds terrible as a parent. But like these are the things, and I would bet
Yeah.
you that any executive would feel the same, right? So if
Yeah.
we can show you that through media, that's kind of what we strive to do.
It's really interesting because I think you're right. Like so there is this element of a media person, but I think it's also a strategic media person because
Right.
what ends up happening is we have so many performance marketers and you see this all over LinkedIn, right? Like uh I ran this Facebook ad campaign and I made this one change and all of a sudden my ROAS went to Y and I'm like, yeah, great, but you could
Yeah.
have also just spent that on brand and done so much better.
Want to know what one of the things we learned this year, which was pretty great, is we kind of figured out where our ceiling was.
Yeah.
It was interesting because we had to do it in a time when it wasn't key seasonality, right? So it was
Yeah.
definitely late summer types of period. Someone came to us and was like, is it possible to, generate more revenue? We're like, let's see. We
Yeah.
put a bunch of money in, and guess what?
It
Our
didn't.
it
You saw
tanked.
the plateau. Yeah.
It tanked. So
Yeah.
it actually was great because I was like, what we were doing is actually where our spend should be, but you know where that money needs to go? It's brand media
Yeah.
because I have no new people in this funnel that I can be talking to. You need to bring them in. And then it was this whole thing of like, well, do we have the creative in hand? Do we have enough
Right.
inventory? Is it all like it? So it's not like they have to work
I do
together.
love that as soon as you hit brand, it starts all of these really interesting conversations that should still be
Right?
happening with
And
performance.
that's the whole problem. Is like I will say too, like Hasbro's incredibly we've come a long way. I'm not trying to discredit anyone, but I would say historically it's been a very traditional organization. If you go back when I first started at Hasbro, 8, 9 years ago, it was all television, right? So
Right.
like you would make an MSA, which is what people say internally, it's just basically a television commercial, right? You would
Yep.
create that, you would put it out into the world, and your sales would go up, and they'd
Yeah.
read your report, and great,
Well,
right?
Christina, because you would run Saturday morning cartoons, and that doesn't work anymore. That doesn't exist. I was like trying to get my kids into Saturday morning cartoons, and they don't know what that is anymore.
It's exactly right. And obviously the evolution, like it's just become more fragmented. Who are you even
Yeah.
talking to? And the other thing too is like with talking to children via advertising, it's incredibly restricted. So like we have a
Yeah.
lot of things we're unable to actually do. So just the evolution there. So, I think from a creative perspective, we really have to, and you cannot use a television commercial on digital, but like,
Right. Yeah, it's so
but then
different.
it's like, how do I plan for that as a brand person? How do I budget for that? Like, what happens if my brand gets caught because, like, another
Yeah.
brand is doing better? Like, do we have things in the can, but we might not use? Like, it's really complicated when you're talking about a portfolio of brands. And I do think though that with digital, there's a lot that you can do now, which is one of the things I am most excited about in terms of having really fantastic brand creative that you can do pretty inefficiently.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome. I
get your
know.
point
I,
across.
I'm really excited to kind of dig into that.
Hmm.
And I think we'll have to have Jennifer on and
Yes,
ask her all things about that for sure. But
absolutely.
um, one of the things I really want to chat with you about too is because you have this unique challenge in
Mm.
that the people that you want to build demand with are not the people who are purchasing the product.
Oh, you are talking my kind of conversation. It's true because how many, 6-year-olds do you know have a debit card or a credit card
Yeah.
that allows you to
Yeah.
swipe and get what they want? Exactly. So
Yeah.
we have dual targets, which when you think about the expense of that as well, and then the pure volume of brands and making sure that you're spending to sufficiency, like yeah, your budget gets eaten up, and we're a global organization. So we're not just talking in the US, we're talking in,
Right.
at least top 5, 6 markets. So
And it's got to be split up because each market's going to react differently,
vastly
right? Like,
different,
yeah.
vastly. And the mediums that are available, like for example, like, a market like Germany, like they're still somewhat traditional. So like,
Right.
and the assets that are required there, they still need like a television commercial as like, compared to America, who's
And
watching?
the cultural differences too, right? Like
Of
it's just
course.
the way you speak to them and how and the things that matter, right? So
Exactly, exactly. So all of that is, I mean, you could probably also do a whole conversation on creative and the global nuances, and that is a whole other conversation. But thankfully,
yeah.
I do not oversee that. But yes, I will say, so like a brand like Play-Doh, for example, where we truly see that what the brand really take off is the dual target is when for kid and adult and a brand like Play-Doh, just because it is preschool. Like that is the
Yeah,
target.
it's
Another
early.
brand like Peppa Pig, for example, where truly it's like something that we call internally is the nag factor, which like you don't realize how important that is when kids are building their wish list, which typically
Yeah.
happens. We target our media going live right around when those catalogs drop, because that's when
Right.
kids are making their list, checking them twice, right? Making
Yeah.
sure that all of that they want. And that's when we're really going on with the kid messaging because it combines with what they're seeing in those catalogs. And then after that, we kind of have adult come on because that's when we be like, oh, that's right. A parent's not going to buy a toy for a kid unless their kid has asked for it or expressed some sort of interest, if that's via content, via something they already have at home. It's very rare that a parent would be like, oh, my kids never played with X. Let me buy that for them. Right. So
Right.
it's really important to kind of lay that foundation with the kid and then have adult take off. So when you think about that, that's really the intersection of brand versus performance, right? Like
Yeah.
putting that out there so kids are understanding. And even still, like the landscape for kids has drastically changed. I mean, Paramount is probably the biggest at this point in terms of a linear perspective. YouTube, of course, is huge.
Yeah.
But there's certain ways we can talk to kids on talk, and I say that in air quotes, to kids, because we can't technically target.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of restrictions we have there. But then with performance retail, I mean, parents are shopping and they're also going to an Amazon or a Target or a Walmart, and actually that's how they shop. They research, they read the reviews. It's not like they're going to, sites where they're reading gift guides like they used to back in the
Right.
day.
Yeah.
So it's
Especially for kids. I feel like for kids
really.
that's like not a consumer journey anymore.
No, it's really it's kind of, I was thinking about it as I was like, oh, I'm talking to Smear. What am I going to talk about today? And I was like thinking about where my career started in toys alone versus
Yeah.
where we are now. And the evolution over these past, 8 years has been pretty incredible. And just
Yeah.
the pure change and the adaptation that people have had to take within specifically the toy industry. I do feel like it is an industry that is changing quite drastically just because of also the shrinking of the life cycle of how long a kid plays with the toy
Yeah.
nowadays, just because of technology.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're taping this literally the first week of January, and
Yes.
so Christina and I both have little kids and have just gone through, the Christmas and holiday season of gift giving, and Hasbro has taken over my house, but like even that thing like Battleship, which my kids
Oh,
got,
yes.
which I like our buying cycle was nostalgia. Right, like it wasn't even like, oh, it's a whole new toy. Like this is like we saw it at a friend's house and it
Right,
reminded us that we should have it. And it's
right,
like, how do you
right.
continually trigger that? And how do you kind of make sure that that's front and center from a media perspective? Because you're not like that's latent demand, right? But I still do
Of
need
course,
to be reminded of it from time to time.
of
And,
course, of
and
course. Yeah, and then you just also think too, like, because of the technology and the impact it's had on these kids' life, like, are they gonna have that feeling when they're
yeah,
p right? So, like,
yeah,
a big focus for Hasbro on the go forward is, the gamification,
yeah,
digitalizing, traditional games. So, like, Battleship, how is that gonna be played online? What does that look like in the
yes,
future, right? So, like, that's a
yeah.
whole other thing, that is going for sure. And then how you interact and how you promote and advertise, like, that's
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know there's so much. It's interesting because I think going back to just like e-com and consumer as a whole, kids is an interesting one because the buying journey changes so drastically so quickly because each generation has a whole new like it's almost like every year you're having to rethink, yeah, how are people
oh, we're
looking at
talking
toys,
to a
where
different
are
consumer, like, I would say 3 is being really generous into,
yeah,
if you think about a preschooler, like, they're probably out of playing with Play-Doh way earlier than they were when we were kids, right?
yeah,
And that
yeah,
just amplifies. The older they get, the smaller it gets, right?
right,
You have girls who are 8 years old who are shopping at Sephora. I wasn't
yeah,
shopping at Sephora till I was 20. You know what
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I wasn't asking for a sleep mask. Like,
yeah.
no, I was asking for a Fisher Price kitchen, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So if
yeah. I
you
mean,
think
it's so
about the impact
it's
it has on the toy industry as a whole, right? So, like, there's obviously have been, and it's in the press, like, the
yeah,
industry is shrinking because of exactly this reason, and it's really important. And I think Hasbro is doing a great job in terms of making sure that we are staying on top of that trend of gamification and digitalizing and all of that type of stuff, because that is how kids are engaging now.
yeah. It's interesting because then it's like so. So I guess the question then comes back to you around. Okay, now I've got a smaller pool of kids
Mhm.
that I want to go after. I can't target them,
Correct.
right? Because
I
that's not
zero
legal. Yeah,
ability to target or
zero
have
ability to
any
target
sort of
them.
data on them. Right.
Yeah. So how do you come up with creative that's going to work for that pool? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure things like click through rate and engagement rate become really important because you need people to opt into
Right.
it needs to actually grow with them.
Yeah.
And so, how does that work at kids? And
Yeah.
then, what are the KPIs that you're looking at for like adult marketing? Right,
Totally.
like
Yeah.
they've got to be very different and
Oh,
very,
yeah.
you know,
And Samir, it goes right back to brand versus performance, right?
interesting. Yeah,
So
yeah,
to be fair, so when you're thinking about anything with the kid, like a video completion rate is huge, right? Because that is truly telling us if a kid or anyone, I guess, depending on the medium, is how long they are staying within a piece of content. But also that piece of content needs to be really sticky. It needs to be really relevant. It needs to be authentic. And something that used to work on TV doesn't necessarily work on YouTube, right? So
right.
again, it's like making sure that our creative is fit for platform, really leaning into best practices. It's not a one size fits all approach. It's incredibly tailored and nuanced. And that's really hard to manage across a variety of brands. I would also say things like brand lift studies are really important, brand
Yeah,
health metrics, because that can tell us, like, did this really truly have an impact on the brand? Because that's the stuff that's not coming through in a dashboard. um
right.
that's truly the disadvantage of brand media, in the sense of, it's expensive, you don't necessarily see the immediate impact, and, thirdly, it's hard to truly understand if it's working, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
performance, I would say, or anything that's adult focused, it's all about, I would say that's where those types of actions are really important that we can track, right? Like the impact to sales, the new to brand is huge for us that we're always
Okay.
looking at within, how were we able to get like new customers in. A big piece too, specifically that we're seeing some really great success in currently on Amazon is occasions outside of holidays. So birthdays, making sure that we're always relevant in, because again, like, being a media person versus just being like, a parent or a gift giver.
Yeah.
Gifts for 5-year-olds, right? Like shopping.
Yeah.
That's how typical, if I'm an uncle or an aunt, like I don't know what I'm doing. Like, what am I going to
Yeah.
buy my niece or my nephew? That's how I'm going to search. And that wasn't when you're only focusing on, your brand, you're not going to show up there. So we have call them pan Hasbro campaigns, which allow us to flex in terms of being a part of these larger types of
That's cool.
initiatives, which has
Yeah.
really shown and gotten a ton of new people into our funnel because that's not a place we were investing in. So
Yeah.
that's been, and I think when you think about just the overall performance, it's very easy to have tighter metrics and it's easier to speak to that to an executive. So again, where does the budget get cut from? Brand media,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
right? And then what
Yeah.
happens is it all falls on performance. And then it's literally you're cutting off the funnel. And then it's like you just can't generate what you need to.
Yeah, you fall into the death spiral, which is the hard
Yeah,
part. But yeah,
exactly.
that's really
There's a
interesting.
way we can make that all come together in a really easy report, Samir. I don't know. It feels like
Uh, one day, one
one
day.
one
The hard
day.
part, it's not even that, it's not even the fact that it's hard to put it into a report. I honestly think it's a communication and trust thing. I think it's
Oh,
really hard to get CEOs
absolutely.
to trust. So I have this theory. I have this thesis. People will probably have heard this before. I think performance marketing led marketers to really bad habits, and this concept of we're going to put $1 out there and you're going to get $2 back. Like that's not what the biggest best brands were built on. Like you think Nike, Hermes, all these guys, like they're not like, oh, we were performance marketing masters. They were brand marketing masters.
Well, and to be fair, like, can you tell me off the top of your head? Like, this was a huge learning curve internally. What are you showing for creative on performance retail? A product shot.
Yeah.
Like obviously there's tactics that are video and but you're when you think about a brand like Nike, it's or these other
Yeah.
amazing, like I always so many like P&G, like it's these Dove, all these amazing commercials. You're not seeing that on a retail site.
No, it's a DPA ad. It's a dynamic ad. It's a product ad. You at that
It's a
point,
product carousel. It is the least sexiest thing you will ever see. So like when executives come and like, I need to see the creative, and I'm just like, it's a bunch of product ads. Like
yeah,
that has nothing to do with the meat. Like that's not the problem here.
yeah, yeah. I know. It's like it's this like interesting concept. I think a lot of people put so much onus on this like consideration phase, right? Like it's always okay. We're gonna brand awareness is important because you want to make it into the consideration set. Once you're in the consideration set, that's where we're gonna win. And I'm like, actually, when you're looking at the funnel, stop going bottom up. You should sandwich in because it really doesn't matter if you make
Yep.
it if you like run a ton of consideration ad campaigns, you're not even in the consideration set. Like
Right.
that's where
Right.
you're capping out. So
Exactly.
spend in your brand campaigns, fill your consideration set, spend in your consideration sets, and move down into the bottom of
And
the
then I
funnel.
would
So
say even for Hasbro though, but we need to prioritize even ahead of that in terms of which brands.
right. Yeah. I
So
mean, I
that's
think
the
that
other thing.
that's a I do have this question for you because I think this is a unique to a portfolio, but like what happens when you've got a plan
Mhm.
and you've got brand campaigns going for this product and this brand and Play-Doh, and all of a sudden Peppa Pig takes off.
Mhm.
And now because you're going, well, I planned all this performance money
And
for
that's it. That's every day. That is literally, it is literally like there's people internally, I would say back in the day where they would refer to like flow charts as like bingo, right? Like you move things
yeah.
around, which is actually very accurate. But I would say like it. you need to be incredibly flexible, you need to be
Yeah.
nimble, and you need to make sure, at least in my world, it's very easy for us to optimize. I would say it is
Yeah.
much harder just based upon how things are structured in the brand world. Like a lot of that's custom content, right? So like
Right.
if it's a
It's too
larger,
late.
it's too late. And
Yeah.
we have a report internally which is really helpful, which we call the flex versus the firm. So it's like anything that's flexible, like we can pull off at any minute. Anything that's firm, like that's part of a larger commit. That's part of,
That's smart.
creative that we've already paid for. So so you do kind of have to set up your bets. But here's the thing that I will say: media is not the only lever that we should be pulling, right? Like
Right.
if PR is doing their job, then they should also
Right.
media should truly just be like, okay, people know about it. It's just getting out there at this point. But have to be other levers in a portfolio company that allow you to have brands to be successful because we have gotten to your point, like there are some really bad habits at Hasbro as well, in the sense of like, everything has to be media supported. But like, here's the thing: if it's not media supported to sufficiency, you're literally lighting money on fire.
I know. Like when people put like a percentage of a dollar against, and I'm like, what are we doing here? We're not moving anything.
Right, and
Or
then
like when it's only media, and you're like, oh, it's only media, and media is going to drive 90% of this. I'm like, no, we are gas to a fire. But if there's no fire, we're just going to put it out. Like that's what media is.
exactly, exactly. And and it's tough because you have these folks that are only working on one brand. So like, and they're pitching externally. So there are a variety of pressures, and I understand that as well, right? We
Yeah.
always want to
Yeah.
support everything as best as we can, but no one is a winner when we are supporting things that are not sufficient, because
Right.
then I'm reporting out on something that's saying, hey, guess what? Like we only saw X. From a media perspective, I'm going to optimize it to its however I can, and it will still be, above our benchmark, but bet you're not going to generate any sales. And then that's a terrible message for you to have to communicate. So
When I was at Amex, some of the best brand managers, I think they were the best at coalition building, is what I would say. They would get everybody on, and it made it so much easier for everyone. You got two people to say, yeah, I'm going to support this brand. Then all of a sudden, every channel manager wanted to support the brand, right? And so like I think that's like a key thing is one note for brand managers, please, media is not the start and the end. It is a
right.
part of the puzzle, please.
Yeah. And I think it's just, again, I keep going back to the portfolio piece because I do truly feel it. Like I feel it at Hasbro, how challenging it is, because it creates a lot of feelings of like one brand doing well, but like at the end of the day, like we just need, if we're going to put media on, and that's all I care about in charge of media, right? I want
Yeah.
it to succeed. I don't want
Yeah.
to spread that peanut butter. Like that is what we
Yeah.
need to hold the ground to, because otherwise no one is a winner.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so listen, I know we're coming up to the end, so I want to ask you my final question. And
Yes.
so, as you're looking at the future,
Mhm.
I think we talked about it. Your world moves so fast, and you're having to continually innovate. What emerging trends or technologies are you most excited about? Like, where are you looking at?
I don't want to sound like corny when I say this, but truly, I think AI is going to, in a variety of ways. And I'm not talking in terms of like what people use it for and whatever. I'm talking more so in efficiencies of processes. I think that digital as a whole is so process heavy, in order, like there's going to be so much efficiency, and unless we,
Yeah.
from an agency side, I mean, we didn't even touch the agency piece on how we actually function with agencies at Hasbro. But I think manpower is a huge one. I think creative is
Creative
something
for
that
sure.
we need to unlock, because not only like through performance retail, like I have the ability to understand the types of audiences that I'm talking to in certain climates. Like there should be
Yeah.
creative for all of that, right? And it's not something, I mean, we're so used to creating a one off. It is like we should have 20 pieces of creative at any given time, right?
Yeah,
Like,
because you were doing the math, right? Like, if I make this variation of creative and it costs me an extra $1,000, then my click through rate needs to be Z to make it. But now that math changes if it's like it
oh,
costs me nothing, or like it costs me 30 cents. right? And
And when you talk about just wanting to be nimble and flexible through AI, like, yeah, let me just create a whole library, an asset library, right? So that way I
yeah.
am set up. I always say, like, I'm Italian. I always love to have a leftover in my fridge, right? Like give me all the leftovers so that I can pull it out and put it out there
Yeah.
when ready. Because when you're creating, $300,000 on what used to be a beautiful asset, you can't scale that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be that. People don't expect to see that. People are okay with things being, not necessarily polished or rough, but again, like people expect to see content that's tailored to what they're seeing now. We have trained the consumer. So, you putting something that doesn't feel right, that's not
To
fit
them.
for
Yeah.
platform, is actually more harming for a brand. So I
Yeah.
think in just terms of efficiency, be able to scale, like that's where I think from processes, that's where I think AI is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Versus, like writing types of papers or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah. That's your
all of
marketing
it.
operations side coming out, Kristina. That's your marketing us.
Yes. I mean, there are definitely a lot of uses for AI in the world of operations and contracts and so on and so forth. But I
Yeah.
think in order to make sure that we are set up for success in a manpower perspective, that is where I think AI is really exciting and can be incredibly transformative.
Yeah. I mean, even for like you guys, just even like checking the creative to make sure that it's on brand, it speaks to the right thing. Like there's just this like layer of almost a second set of eyes that it could be really valuable for.
And I would say I'm removed from the agency side since I've been on client for so long, but I gotta believe, remember when we were on an agency, like the processes and the spreadsheets and the things that, to get a click tracker and just like I could only hope, right? And then if they're leveraging AI, then ideally the fees would go down. And then that's obviously really attractive to a brand as well, because then we can invest in other types of things like research or, that
Yeah.
we're unable to necessarily do at this point in time because we're paying for people for hands on keyboard, right? Like there's
Yeah.
just so much that I think is really, really exciting because we're all just at the end of the day trying just to put the best campaigns forward to have the best results for, the brands we work for.
Oh, what a great way to close that, Christina. Thank you. That
Oh,
was awesome. Yes, thank you. So thank you so much for joining us.
yeah.
This was awesome. And it's funny because you and I could talk forever and
Yes.
I'm looking forward to continuing to. If someone wants to find you online, where can people learn more about you?
I guess you can find me on Instagram. Shocking, my handle is the sparkly redhead.
I love it.
Very much on brand. Also, feel free to email me, Kristina.Fields@Hasbro.com.
Oh, amazing, Christina. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.